rationalization and justification of I'm not an addict like you, as long as I just eat them like they're prescribed, right? But probably like 10 times more than any
but
prescription
they're
was said.
prescribed. It's okay.
Yeah, you take them, right? I'm not like you, right? And here became my long 9-year run of just going, right? And feeling different, right? Like that I don't qualify. I'm not an addict. I'm not like you guys.
Yeah, they're prescribed. It's okay.
When I came into the rooms, there was nobody eating pills, right?
No.
There was nobody eating pills. They were all smoking meth and doing heroin, right? So again, I'm not like you guys,
Yeah, you
right?
look different. Yep.
Yeah. Even though I could dabble in this, that, the other thing, my primary thing is my problem is prescription meds, right? And to me, even the fact that I was eating 35 fucking Norcos a day, right? Like 3 Xanax bars and like a handful of Somas, right?
Yes.
I'm not like you guys. I'm not that fucked up. This podcast is brought to you by our friend and realtor, Naomi Townsend with Keller Williams Property Teams. She'll help you in every step of the way, whether you're buying or selling a home, commercial property, mobile home, or even a vacant lot. In the last few years, she's helped hundreds of families buy their dream homes in the Central Valley, Bay Area, Monterey, and even the Sacramento area. Check her Zillow profile where she has a perfect 5-star ranking. She is also bilingual in Spanish. In 2021, she was in the national top 2 in her brokerage. Please, guys, check out her Instagram, Sold by Naomi, or reach out to her at 408-623-1414. All the links are in the bio. Remember, guys, support those who support us. This podcast is brought to you by our friends at Sorensen's Ace Hardware, located at 402 Washington Avenue in Los Banos, proudly serving the community since 1947. Please check out our friend at Sorensen's for all your hardware needs. Come on, guys, support those who support us. Thanks, Sorensen's.
Not so anonymous with a... No, I can't do it. Not so anonymous with EJ Areca.
Man, we're here with Taylor T.
Hi.
Taylor, thank you for taking your time and sitting with us. I know you're a busy lady. You got 2 young children, and life is in full swing.
It is. Always is.
But so Taylor, I know Taylor, right? I knew Taylor before I got clean, before she got clean. Or I should say I knew of Taylor because my wife knew Taylor, right? And then I went and got clean, came back, and I was hanging out where we hang out, and all of a sudden this Taylor gal popped up, right? And so I'd say for me, from like
7 months pregnant too.
7 months pregnant.
7 months pregnant.
How long? How much clean time did you have at that time? It was under a year, right?
Yeah, I had probably about. Well, I turned 1 year clean right after my son was born, so I had about 8 months clean, probably.
8 months clean.
Yeah, I had about 8 months clean.
Right. So you popped back up in the rooms in Los Banos at 8 months clean, and I think I was like a year and a half, somewhere around there. So like early recovery, I would be around Taylor a lot, right? Like we became good friends. I watched Taylor go through a lot of stuff, clean in her first year, have a baby, do all this stuff, right?
Wow.
And she was a confidant of mine, right? We would confide in each other, and we became good friends, right?
Yes.
So I have a lot of gratitude for you, right?
Thank you.
Even though I don't see you much anymore because you're busy and you live in a different town, I'm honored to call you my friend, right? So
Same here.
right. So this is Taylor, right?
Hi, everybody.
And so like typically, what's going on with you? What's your life look like today, Taylor? What are you up to?
So my life is really full today. Never would I have thought from where I came from that I would have the life that I have today, right? I'm a full-time drug and alcohol counselor. I work in a different city, so there's the commute and all that. I have 2 young kids. One's almost 5 and one just turned 2. And so life is busy. Life is busy just with school and work and navigating through recovery and navigating through our, just our day-to-day lives. It's busy. It's a lot. But you know what? I was telling somebody the other night, I wouldn't trade this for the world, because there were days that I never thought I would have what I have today. And I'm blessed. I'm nothing short of blessed to have what I have.
Right. And it's controlled chaos, I'm sure.
Sometimes.
Right?
Sometimes
at times
it's controlled.
right? Because that sounds really pretty the way you
Yeah,
package that
right?
up right now.
Mhm.
But I'm sure, I know because I have young kids in my house and in a relationship, and I'm trying to manage recovery and do all these things. Even though it looks pretty, sometimes it don't feel so pretty, right?
No, it's not. No, not always. No,
Right.
sometimes it's like pure bloody murder in our household. Literally is what
Right.
it feels like. Yep.
I
Mhm.
get it. So,
Yep.
so for all the people listening, like, what's your clean date, Taylor?
So I'm actually vastly approaching 6 years clean. I got clean on April 10th of 2017. So I'm coming up on 6 years.
Awesome.
Mhm.
And so, like, what does that clean date mean to Taylor?
For me, that means freedom. For me, it means I began a life beyond my wildest dreams. It means that I chose to do something different and have continued to make that choice on a daily basis since then.
Right. And then, so like for the unengaged, somebody, I always go say the same thing, but somebody watching this right now, they're probably looking at us, and you're so young, right?
Yeah.
Like that's another cool thing.
Mhm.
They're looking at us and like, these people aren't addicts, right? They don't know what it's like,
Yeah.
how I'm feeling.
Mhm.
So I tend to like ask whoever's on here to kind of, almost qualify yourself. We don't typically tell drug-a-logs or do anything
Yeah.
like that, right?
Mhm.
But like, what did life, look like in the early years for Taylor?
Mhm.
What led you to using and things like that?
Yeah. So you know what? I am young, right? I'm 27 years old, but for someone that hears that, they're like, "Whoa, how long did she use for?" I started using when I was 13 years old. Actually, before that, I was dabbling and just partying, so to say, probably since I was 11 or 12, right? I always hung out with older people, always did, trying to be cool, overcompensating for my age, right? And so it started off just partying, but I was a full-blown addict by the time I was 13, and I was even worse by the time I turned 14. As far as what led me to using, I had a great childhood. Honestly, I was raised by a strong woman who did her best to give my sister and I absolutely everything. We weren't raised in a home with drugs. We were raised with someone who was an alcoholic, but that was far and few between the times that he was around. But as far as actively using or abuse in our home, we didn't have that. I'm raised in an Italian household, so there's wine with dinner and things like that, but it was never active substance use, active alcohol use. It was nothing like that. We knew we were loved. We felt we were loved. And really, I think that it was, for me, it was wanting to feel that acceptance from people, wanting to be cool, so to say. And so I was just hanging out with all the older people, like I said, going out, wanting to be fun, have fun. And that just took me into not wanting to feel. I would drink or smoke weed or do things like that. And then not only did I feel accepted or I feel a part of this older crowd that I was with, but it also made me realize that I didn't feel what I was feeling, right? Because I did have trauma. I did have some trauma growing up and throughout my younger years of life and early teens, like there was some trauma, right? And so me wanting to ignore it or act like it was okay or act like it was normal, the drugs helped achieve that. The alcohol helped me achieve that. And so then I learned that when I put something in my body, I don't feel what I'm feeling or I don't think what I'm thinking, right? I'm not Taylor. I'm not the little, because really what I was a little girl, and I can acknowledge that today is I was a young girl hanging out with people who are 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, getting loaded with them or partying with them. That's not super appropriate.
Right.
And so what I see now is not only did I want that acceptance or that like camaraderie, as a young child, but I also just didn't want to feel. And I learned that the substances helped me to achieve that.
Right. And so, and I got to imagine like most of us, right? Because it always starts off as fun. Like this is a good time, right? And then the further you go down this road, the more things are starting to pile up on that. I don't want to feel this.
Yeah.
Right. And so for you, from 13 to 21, you got clean?
I stayed clean at 20.
At 20, right? So, I mean, a lot of stuff can happen in 7 years, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't have to have a 30-year using career to hit the bottom, right? And so like, how does that progress? Because I got to imagine like most of us, it feels pretty innocent when you start drinking a little bit and smoking a little weed. and then hanging around, you get introduced to other stuff, right?
Yeah.
That progresses, right?
Mhm.
So like, what does that look like?
So, of course, I didn't get clean because it was all bad, right? I would not be here if it was all bad.
Yeah.
I'm only here because it's bad. All the fun stuff. So it started out fun. It started out entertaining. It was cool. It was whatever. And then I got with a person, right? I got in a relationship with somebody who wasn't using, but it was accessible, right? I'll put it.
Sorensen's also has a Modesto location located at 1433 Coffee Road. Modesto, true value for all your hardware needs. For all of our people out in the Modesto area, please support those who support us. Thank you.
That way it was accessible. And I took my first pain pill. And I remember it clear as day. I remember I took it and I felt absolutely amazing and I vomited everywhere and was just incredibly messed up. And despite like that chaos, the way that I felt, I spent the next 7 years of my life chasing that same feeling that I felt the next 7 years. And so it started off just pills here and there, feeling that. And then I quickly realized that it was too expensive, not enough, and it stopped serving a purpose. It stopped giving me the effect that I wanted to feel good. And so next thing you know, I started going into heroin.
Right.
I started using heroin, and that was by the time I was 14. I was a full-blown heroin addict.
Yeah, and that's like the misconception is it doesn't, once you get that, I remember that feeling, I can tell you, because I had dabbled in a lot of different things, pain pills, I can pinpoint it to an exact time. I could see the time in my mind right now when everything changed for me, right?
Yeah,
And I had that feeling, like they say, chasing the dragon, right?
Yeah.
You get that one and you spend whatever you have, whether it be time, money, relationships, you just don't care. It's all about finding that next one, right?
And that's exactly what I did. I everything that I said I wouldn't do, I did. And some, as a result of trying to get that very first high that I felt.
Right.
And it's a high that you'll never achieve. It's a high that you'll never achieve again, right? And you can put as much substances in your body over and over and over again. You could try it every which way, but the reality of it is we spend all those years of our using trying to get that one high, and it's a high that we'll never get again until you find recovery. And at least that's how it was for me.
Right. And you knew better, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that's the thing that people don't get. Like, what? Don't they know any better, right? Like we were both raised with morals and all these things.
Yeah.
And when you start doing things that you know are wrong against your own free will, you're caught in the cycle.
Yeah.
Right.
You don't have a way out. I tell people all the time, you know what, like when we get clean, we gain our ability to choose again. Right. And it's when we're under the influence that we lose that. Right. And as quickly as we get it back, it's that easy to lose again. But in that cycle over and over and over again, it's a cycle of insanity. It doesn't stop. It does not stop until one day we have the desire to get clean. And then at that point, we gain our ability to choose again and have that choice. And that choice comes with the responsibility. But you know what? Like we make a conscious decision at that point where we're going to go in our lives when we get clean.
Right. And so at the age of 14, when you start using, heroin, how do things change in your family dynamic? Right. I got to assume that things started getting a little sloppier and a little bit more obvious, right? Like at this point, you would be a freshman in high school.
Yeah.
Right. And
freshman, sophomore. Yep. About there.
And so what starts happening in your life? I'm sure the unmanageability starts popping up everywhere, right?
Yeah. I was never a big school person to begin with. But once I really started digging in my addiction more, the school just kind of stopped. Right. And so my parents took me out, put me on independent studies, which was really good because it allowed me to graduate high school successfully and do things like that, going the continuation school route. But what it also did for me is it also allowed me to spend more time getting loaded instead of focusing on school. And so there was signs to, there was just chaos in the home. I was never around. I would sleep in, I had those crazy tweaker hours, as people call it, staying up late. I took a lot of money from my family, given and taken from them. And at the end of the day, I think what really sent my family over the edge was they're like, where the hell is all this money going? Like, what are you doing with all of this? And so my manipulation tactics, my buttering it up is, I'm just buying weed. Well, that's a hell of a lot of weed, know? And again, like back then, this is before weed was like it is now, it wasn't the clubs or anything like that. And the next, I'm having my mom tell my mom, I'm going to go buy, I need you to take me over here to this person's house. I got to go buy weed, right? And I'm going and buying a sack of heroin or a few pills, and so obviously there was signs, just the chaos, the unmanageability, and the pain that came with it, physical and emotional, both.
Well, and you know what? And I was a master of this too, is manipulating the ones closest to you, right? And I have a daughter like just barely above the age that you're describing, right?
Yeah.
And the things that we do for these children, and sometimes we think we're doing it in their best interest when we're really enabling this type of behavior, right? And unbeknownst to the other person, they're just doing the best they can with what they know, right? But once we get into this lifestyle, people don't understand it, right? Unless you've been in it, you don't understand the power that this has over one's mind. Lying, cheating, stealing, manipulating, all the tactics, right?
And I've come to learn that, thank God those people don't understand. It is truly a blessing if you do not understand the disease of addiction, because if you don't understand it, it means that you haven't lived through it yourself, or you haven't been unfortunate enough to walk through life with somebody that has an addiction.
Right.
And just all you can do in that aspect is just have the compassion and the empathy towards those who do have to understand it, who are the unfortunate ones that have to understand this.
When I think this day and age, it's becoming more of a everybody issue, right? At this point, almost everybody has been touched by this disease in one form or another,
whether they admit it or not.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so now, how long does it take before your mom and everybody at home starts catching on, like, hey, this ain't just weed, right? Like something's going on here?
Honestly, I think that they knew the whole time, if I'm being honest. I don't know exactly how long it took for them to realize. All I know is that over those years, where it ended was my parents calling the police on me several different times, and ended up in a huge physical altercation between me and my parents because I was strung out and didn't have a lighter to cook up what I was using. And this is the journey that got me to being clean. Was I didn't have a lighter to cook up what I wanted, and I just flipped the hell out, had a total meltdown, right? Total addict behavior meltdown of, you need to take me to the store right now, I need a lighter. And they're like, no, like, you're not doing this, because they knew, I'm sure.
Right.
And just flipped out of control. Physical altercation happened, cops were called, got arrested, went to jail. And from there, I was released from jail to my stuff on the front porch, to my parents telling me, you're not coming home, we're done. Like total tough love. And that's exactly what I needed. They said, if you want to go to rehab and get off this shit, then go ahead, but you're not coming back here until you do. And so all my stuff was on the front porch. I was exited out of the house. I have a little brother and sister who needed a real life, and I took that from them throughout my addiction. My sister's 4 years younger than me, and my brother's almost 10 years younger than me. And so because of my addiction being so young, I took their childhood away from them in a lot of different aspects. And my mom had just had it. My parents had just had it, and they said, you're done. Your sister and brother deserve to have a real life, and they're not going to have it with you around. And so, like the good little addict that I am, I'm like, I don't need them. I got this. Right. And so I try to like use my own devices, which, for a lot of people who have the disease of addiction, where using your own devices leads you to.
Right.
And I found myself just bouncing from house to house to house. That's one thing that I can say throughout my addiction. Like that's one of my yets, as I call it, is I was never homeless. I never sold my ass. I'm one of those fortunate ones that it didn't come to that. But being homeless was my yet as far as sleeping on the streets. But like what I know today is I was pretty much homeless. For a while, I was bouncing from house to house to house, just finding somewhere to lay my head at night that would still allow me to get loaded. And so, long story short, or long story longer, I went out to go get loaded or to cop or something, and some really traumatic events happened to me in that moment. I was kidnapped by a group of men while I was out there trying to score. They kept me for few days, I think about 4 days, and some really traumatic stuff happened during that time, and they just dumped me back out where they found me, and I woke up in my car overdosed because I attempted to just end things right then and there, because at that point in my addiction I didn't see a way out. All that I saw was me, hopeless, never gonna get better. This is the only way out. I wanted so badly to do something different, but I didn't know how to. And so I woke up in my car some hours later, overdosed, and I woke up from a text from my mother, the same message she had sent me probably 50 times before this. And she said, Taylor, if for nothing else, get clean for your brother and your sister who want their big sister around again. And for whatever reason, that hit me like a ton of bricks right then and there. And I said, okay, I'll go get help. And within 2 days, I was on a plane going to Palm Springs to go to rehab for the very first time.
And so up until that point, had anybody introduced a practical solution to your problem, right? Like being
No.
arrested. And I think that's the crazy things. There's such
Yeah.
a disconnect between
Mhm.
the, whether it be the authorities or, and that's another, like the mission statement behind this podcast is introducing ways and means for people to change their life, right?
Yeah. And look, I've served time before, and not once did was I offered a program or was I offered something other than prison and release, jail and release. I was never offered that. I don't know if I just wasn't qualified or if it wasn't just normalized then or if the resources weren't there, but what I know today is like there are resources.
Right.
And why isn't it being pushed out? That's a topic. That's a whole nother topic for me is, the criminal justice system and the lack of resources that are associated with it. Yeah, well, that's a whole nother thing for me.
We can get into a whole lot.
We could have a whole new podcast on that one, EJ. Yeah.
So, so now you're on a plane to Palm Springs, right?
Yeah.
And so you have this, you're so low at this point that you're willing to accept some help, right? And so how fast does it switch from, hey, man, I'm going to get this help to, fuck, I need to get loaded again, right? Because I know this was the end.
Well, you know what? On that plane, right, I remember I got loaded for the last time the day before I got on that plane, right? My mom was driving me to San Jose. I remember when they dropped me off in San Jose, I was trying to say goodbye to my sister, and I'm sure she remembers this too, but she would not say goodbye to me. She said, I hate you. I hate you. Why would you do this to us, right? And so the desire was there, right? I had some sort of a desire, but I remember telling myself on that plane the next day, because at this point now, like I'm starting to withdraw a little bit. I don't feel high, like reality kind of hit me like, oh shit, I'm going to go to rehab. I have no idea what to expect. I'm 19 years old, had just been assaulted and arrested and like all these crazy things, right? And so reality finally started to set in. And I said, you know what? It's okay. They told me that I just have to do 30 days and then I can come home again, right? And so in my head, it was, I'll do 30 days. I'll dry out a little bit. My tolerance will drop and then I'll come back home and everything will be normal, right? Like that was my thought process. But, like it took me 9 months for me to say, shit, I want to get high again. Right. If I'm being honest, what I learned when I went to that first rehab, no, that was not my first and only clean date. That's not my story. But what I did learn, although I did not stay clean after this, but what I did learn is that I wasn't a hopeless dope fiend. Like I learned that there was a solution and that I was capable of it. The seed was planted. Right. In other words, I just chose to not water it. But I went to that rehab and I actually started enjoying that feeling. Once the withdrawal stopped and I started to feel more like a human instead of a skeleton again, I started to realize like, wow, you know what? I kind of like this. Like, I kind of like this life that I'm living. And I chose to stay clean for 9 months following that. And then what happened for me was I got a big life. I got a job again. I moved to Los Angeles after Palm Springs into a sober living. I got a job. I saved my money. I got my own apartment. I was in service. I was doing all these things that the 12-step program tells us to do. And I thought to myself, wow, like my life is so good. I've gotten so much. How could I ever want to go back to using?
Right.
And because of that way of thinking, I stopped doing all those things. I was just stuck on life instead of stuck in a program. And just as quickly as I stopped going to these meetings, I just as quickly put a substance in my body again.
Right. And so you were probably about what, 18 or 19 at this point?
I was 19 when I first got clean. Mm-hmm.
And so can you explain like so you start using at the formative age of 13, right? And so a lot of people will say we stop maturing at the age where we stop using.
Yeah.
Right. And then you get clean at 19. Can you explain like what I'm sure, even though you were clean, life was pretty wild, right?
Yeah,
you got
it was
some
a
14-year-old
nutcase.
emotions and a
Yeah,
19-year-old body.
I was a
And
nutcase. Yes, I was super batty. I was batty. And it also was hard because, like I had said in the beginning, like my using was centered around a lot of like older people, right? Like even just being young, partying, I always hung out with the older crowd. And so you drop a 19-year-old in rehab, I was around a lot of older people, right? And so I was fed with a lot of thoughts of, a lot of them telling me, you're so young, like you're not done yet. You're so young. And so a part of me like started to think, like, wow, like, am I done? Like, you've never gone to a bar illegally. You've probably never even been to a bar. And although, yes, I had been to a bar, it wasn't legally, and so that was kind of in the back of my head too. It's like, shit, well, I am so young.
So they just handed you
done?
reservations.
Yeah, they were like handing on a silver platter. Like, here you go. Like, you're only 19. But what I know today and like what I learned too is like, I didn't have to use, like you said, for 30 years. I burnt myself out after 6 or 7. I was done. Like, I knew that I was either going to get clean or I was going to die, because that had already been a reality so many times. Like, I wasn't your typical 13, 14, all the way up until 19-year-old, like I was reckless and I was crazy, but the emotions were definitely high.
Yeah, because it's funny that I was thinking the other day, and I was on my way to the meeting, and I was thinking about like my first year clean, right? About how I didn't have any substances in my body, but I was still crazy, right?
Yeah.
Like my thinking and ways were that of an addict still, right? Like very much so. It wasn't drugs anymore. I could fixate on the wildest shit, right? And so I can only, and I was 34, right? Like, and I was 34, so I can only imagine, being, because we're like little country bumpkins out here in Los Banos, right? And then you get spit out in Los Angeles at 19, thinking that you have something, right? Like
I thought I was the shit,
right.
man. I was like, I'm doing big things. I am 19, living in Los Angeles, when in reality I was 19, living in Los Angeles because I was a freaking dope fiend.
Right.
And I'm living in this fat house and all this. I was in fucking sober living. Okay.
Right.
Like, how much did I really have? Like, really, how big of a freaking person was I? I was nothing, but my head getting this big. Right. Yeah.
And so, okay, so now you pick up 9 months clean. Like what drives you back out at that point? You start talking about disconnecting, right? Thinking that you have this thing figured out.
Yeah.
And so what does it look like when you go back out? Because oftentimes when we go back out, it's at an accelerated pace, right?
Yeah. Oh, I went running towards it. Honestly, like so you said, like that first year clean, right? Like we just drop you in a program, whether it's 12-step or rehab or whatever. They just drop you in there, take away the only coping skill that you have, which is you're using, until you like feel what you feel, right? It's a blessing for you to feel these feelings. But during those 9 months, like I felt a lot of feelings, and I felt a lot of good feelings, but a lot of negative too, because I was young and just my mind was just running rampant.
Yeah, you're filtering all this through a 19-year-old brain, right?
Yeah, and I'm trying to navigate through life on top of all of that. Like, I'm in a city that I don't know, with friends that I've made and family, friends that have turned into family, right? But like, I didn't have family there, because they were out here, and I didn't have a lot of things, and so I'm trying to navigate through as a 19-year-old. Like, at that point, I was still a kid. I was still a kid. And just like you said, right? Like, started using at 13. Like, my mentality was still a lot of a 13-year-old, although more matured, but still, that impulse control was just not there. And so when I started using, honestly, like, I had an urge one day. I saw people using it and I went running freaking towards it. And I picked up, for the first time, thinking that I could use just like I had 9 months prior. And what that looked like for me was overdose in the hospital. First time I had used in 9 months. Instantly overdosed in the hospital. I remember laying on the gurney, because the people that I was using with too, they called 911, thank God, but just left me.
Right.
They just left me. And so next thing I know, I'm waking up to the police and fire department and ambulance all around me. And they're like, you just overdosed. Are you okay? What they told me was that my heart stopped for 4.5 minutes, which is halfway to brain death. I believe brain death, with lack of oxygen, is 8 minutes. And so I was halfway there. And they said, like, do you realize what just happened to you? You just died. It was resistant to the Narcan. We know today, like, Narcan's nasal, but it was IV, right? And so my shirt was torn. There's blood everywhere. And they said, your heart stopped for 4.5 minutes. Like you were dead, and Narcan didn't work. We had to defibrillate your heart. They had to shock my heart with the paddles because I just was not coming back. And so they take me to the hospital. I remember all the nurses and everybody sitting around, and they're just looking at me like I'm just the scum of the earth, And I remember they put me in the triage room. They stuck me in there for 2 hours, didn't come check on me, nothing. And they said, we just have to monitor you, right, to make sure you don't fall back out again. And at that whole point, all I could think about was like, shit, are the drugs still in the house? Did the cops take it? Like, this is the insanity, right? That we talk about. This is the insanity is, God, did they take all the dope? Like, did they take it all? Where is it? How am I going to get back there? Like, okay, how far am I? Is it close enough to walk? Like I'm like playing all these things out in my head to go get loaded again. Not even like, okay, this is a mess. Like, look at how bad life has ended up again in a matter of 2 hours. It was, how can I go get high again? Because the disease of addiction, I went right back in that cycle. I got right back into the grips. And I remember a nurse came in and he told me, he said, how did you end up here? And I told him I had 9 months clean and I slipped and here I am. And he told me, you don't have to do this again. Like you can, it's not too late. You can do it. And they kept telling me too, they said, and again, this is the insanity of the disease of addiction. They kept telling me, if you go back and use, you're probably going to die. Like you were just Narcan. Your heart was just defibrillated because it stopped for a significant period of time. If you use again, you're going to die. And I looked at them and you can't make this shit up. I looked at them and I told them, oh, it's okay. I'll just smoke meth. Like that was my solution, right? Like, that's insanity.
Yeah.
That is insanity. And I'll tell you what, like my intentions were to really just go smoke meth. That was my intentions. But I had a needle in my arm shooting heroin again, less than 2 hours after I was released from the hospital. Because even though with all the warning, all the caution that they told me, the disease of addiction was more powerful.
Right.
That was a lot more powerful than the rationale of you're going to die, And part of that too, now that I think about it, like part of it I think is that's like the immaturity in my level of thinking at 19 years old. Is like I still had that thought of like I'm invincible. It's not going to happen to me, even though it literally just happened to me 2 hours before. I'm invincible. It's not going to happen, right? It's not going to happen to me, when I should have known well at this point that like it can happen to me and it will happen to me, right? But that's the insanity.
Well, and for an addict stuck in the disease, right? That's you, because the disease can manifest itself in all sorts of matters. But we'll say for an addict that's using, right? It's not uncommon. I just heard this story 3 days ago at a meeting, right? Yeah. And that's what people think. They're like, man, that's how strong this disease is. Yeah. It drives us to our animalistic behaviors, to where all we could think about is the next fix, no matter what,
finding
right?
ways and means to get more. Yep,
so how many times did you OD between that time and the time you got clean?
I think all in all, like throughout my using career, I think I've overdosed 4 or 5 times.
Right.
4 or 5 times, yeah.
And those weren't even powerful enough to jar you into wanting to get clean.
No.
So what's the pivot point for Taylor? What's something that's bigger than yourself that makes Taylor, right, at the age of 20 decide that, man, something's got to change here?
Out of everything in my story, right, because I have one hell of a story. I do. I have, nobody would think looking at me today, right, as like I'm the addict that I was. This is my favorite part out of the entire story, right, is that for me, it wasn't the physical, it wasn't the consequences, it was none of that. For me, it was the emotional, mental decaying of the person that I was. It was being so mentally and emotionally broken and messed up that I just couldn't take it anymore. And so the last time that I used, I relapsed a couple more times after that first time. I relapsed 3 times in total. So this is my 4th and Taylor willing final clean date. But for me, it was, I used probably for like 2 days. It wasn't even that long. And I found myself in another detox sitting there, just completely emotionally, mentally just broken. Like I remember looking up at the ceiling and just thinking, how did I get here again? How am I here again? They're coming in every 30 minutes, check your vitals and this, that, and the other. And I'm like, I wanted something different. I wanted something different. I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. and it wasn't the consequences. It wasn't what I lost or where I was going to go. It was nothing like that. It was just me, that emotional, mental turmoil of wanting to get loaded so bad, but knowing that I deserve better for myself. It's like that angel and the devil sitting on your shoulder, where the angel's telling you, like, you can do it. It's okay. Just stay clean. And then the devil's on your shoulder saying, like, it's okay. You can just do it again. Like, you can maintain it, And for me, that thought, that angel and the devil, the mental turmoil, the pain and the suffering emotionally that I felt, that's what brought me to my knees, because I was tired of doing that.
Right.
I was tired of sitting in detox time and time again, having the same exact thoughts.
And so that moment, like at that moment, do you reach out for help? Do you end up in another treatment facility? Do you go into a 12-step fellowship? What does that look like?
And that's the thing, is I had been like in and out of the 12-step program for a while throughout this time, right? So when I went to rehab in Palm Springs for the first time, up until you saw me again several years later, I had stayed in Los Angeles. So I never came back here to Los Banos. I stayed over there, and I was in and out of the 12-step program, right? There was even one time that I was shooting to open the bathroom of a meeting, like, again, the insanity. And for me, like, I was that addict that's suffering inside the rooms, that we talk about in the 12-step program. I was that addict still suffering. And so this time around, what I did was I got released from that detox, and I just decided to do things differently. I went to a new sober living for myself. I chose to go in. I chose to go to like a different outpatient program, and then I chose to do a different fellowship, do a different 12-step program, because I had exhausted everything. And so something that was suggested to me was do everything different, go to all different meetings, go to whole different programs, right? Hang out with different people, just do everything different. And I was just so desperate at this point that I was willing to take the suggestion. If you told me to go drink a gallon of paint and I would stay clean, I would have.
Right.
If you told me to go jump off a cliff and I'd stay clean, I would have, because I did have that desperation, because I was tired of feeling the way that I was feeling. And so I just did it all different, and it was suggested to me by my oldest son's godfather, go to meetings, get a sponsor, like reach out, do things, right? And so he told me, he said, you know what, Taylor, go there, get a sponsor, go to the meeting, get a sponsor, work the steps. And after 1 year, if you still want to get loaded, I will get loaded with you. And I looked at this man like he was fucking insane. Okay. I looked at him like, what is wrong with you? And I've told him, I'm like, you've known me for how many years now? Like, you've known me throughout this whole time that I've been trying to get clean. I don't stay clean. Like, I get loaded. Like, I'm a hopeless dope fiend. I'm going to use again. And now you're going to get loaded with me. Like, you're an idiot. Right. And he just laughed at me. And what I know today is, like, this man probably had no faith in me. Right. I don't blame him. I had no faith in myself. But what he did have was faith in a program that he knew changed his life. And if it could change his life, it could change mine too. Right. If I did the work. And so that's exactly what I did.
Well, he probably knew he was the last guy you're going to be looking for if you wanted to get loaded, right?
He's going to go run and hide. Right?
I think my sponsor told me the same shit, right? I'll buy the first one, but he knows I ain't calling him if I'm going to get loaded, right?
So his recovery was a little more secure. Right?
Yeah, yeah. No. But I think, like, for the person listening to this, that's deep in their addiction and that's using at this point, they think that these people are going to push me away if I show up loaded, right? But you're looking at two people that showed up to a lot of meetings loaded.
Yep.
I lied and got a lot of key tags that I didn't deserve, right? Yep. I threw up on a lot of meetings and told some wild stuff.
Yeah, probably things you don't even remember either.
Yeah, unfortunately, I remember some of them. Yeah. but they kept welcoming me, right? Yeah. And telling me, keep coming back, right?
Yep. Keep coming back. Yep.
Right? And so... Yep. And so what does that early recovery look like for a 20-year-old in Los Angeles, right? Like, so what, like,
oh no,
because at that point you're on fire, right?
Yeah.
And I know that, and the people that make it, they turn that desperation into desire.
Yeah.
But when you're riding on that desperation, like, I mean, you can get a lot of stuff done, right?
So this is a horrible question. Really good, but a horrible question at that. So I was young, okay. I, again, just had my only coping skill taken away from me. And so, again, like the good little addict that I was, what do? Replace one drug for another. And that drug didn't look like drugs. It looked like in the form of men, right? Men and relationships and codependency and just chaos, right? And so that's how I ended up pregnant at 4 months clean, That's how that works out.
Right. Well, and that's not uncommon.
Yeah,
right?
It's not. But this is, again, like, this is one of the best parts of my story, because now that child, right, that I got pregnant with at 3 months clean, and his little brother both have only known a mother that's in recovery. So as
Right.
messy as like this story may sound to those people that are listening, as messy as like crazy as this is, like there's hope in it. You
Right.
know, that's my message out of it is there's hope in the chaos.
And I remember you rolling in, right? And you weren't too happy to be in Las Banos.
No, I was
right?
pissed.
You
Yeah, I was
weren't too
pissed.
happy, and you were very pregnant,
Yeah, I was 7 months pregnant.
right?
Yeah.
And you were dealing with a lot of stuff,
Mhm.
right?
You know what? I went in, now that I think about it, I was about 7-8 months pregnant, and I went in to get my 9-month key tag.
Yes.
So I had 9 months clean. Yep.
Yeah, because I
Mhm.
remember that. I think I
Yeah.
gave you your 9-month key
did.
tag, right?
Mhm.
You were sitting on one of the beat down couch.
That had rats underneath it.
Yes,
Yeah.
farthest in the left corner, right? You had a big old
Yep.
hoodie on, very pregnant, right? And a friend
Mhm.
came and brought you to that meeting.
My parents, my mom.
Was it your mom that
It
brought
was
you?
my mom and that same little sister that told me that she hated me and would never forgive me and wished I would have died in my
Right.
addiction. That same little sister. Yep.
And so, what does life look like when you come back? Because if you didn't have a higher power already, you had something bigger than yourself you were
Yep.
staying clean for, right?
Oh yeah.
And
Absolutely.
so, what does that look like for a young woman, right? 20 years old, pregnant, first year of recovery,
Yep.
right? You had a lot going on.
Yeah.
And so it changed from, hey, I'm here in recovery, I'm having a lot of fun, to, hey, oh man,
Yep.
I'm pregnant, right?
Yep.
And then I don't know if you want to talk about his father or anything, like the stuff that you dealt with.
He is my oldest son, his biological father was an addict too, and
you
he
met him in
relapsed
recovery,
during this.
right?
Yeah, I met him we were both in recovery at first, and then he relapsed through
Right.
that, and that was the end of that. Yeah. And so thankfully my son has a man in his life today that's been his father. That's all he knows, and it's truly a blessing in our lives. But as far as his biological father, we were both in recovery at one point. Yeah. Unfortunately, he just chose a different journey.
Well, and
different
so
journey than I
having to deal with that at
Mhm.
that young age, right?
Yeah.
That's one of those no matter what moments, right? Like,
Yeah.
hey,
Yep.
this happened. You're supposed to be with me, and
Yeah.
I watched you go through that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, like, would you say your first major hurdle in recovery?
Oh man, my whole first year was literally filled with no matter fucking what moments. Like
Right.
that is it. My whole first year. That was that was my first of many no matter what's in that my first year, let alone in the whole almost 6 years clean. But yeah, that was the very first.
Yeah.
Out of you just don't use no matter what. And like I hold on to that. I hold on to that sometimes, when all else fails, I just don't use no matter what. That's it.
And so now you're pregnant, you're back home.
Yeah.
And
I was scared. I was terrified. This was the first time, like I said, I lived in Los Angeles that whole time. From when I first got clean to that day, I stayed in Los Angeles. And so I didn't have to come back and face the environment that I used in, and so next thing you know, I came back and I'm in the same house that I used to get loaded in the same bedroom, right, with the same family that I caused unbearable amounts of harm to, and sitting in a town where I had like some significant trauma in my life that I hadn't had to address yet,
Right.
face to face. I emotionally addressed it through step work and things like that, but physically address it in that town, I hadn't had to do that yet. And so I was terrified. I
So
was
what-
scared to leave the house.
What do those relationships look like when you come back, right? Like I'm talking about
Oh.
with the family, because that's,
Yeah.
I like me thinking about it, like I didn't have to deal with as much when I came.
Mhm.
I had children when I came
Mhm.
back, but I wasn't pregnant, right?
Thank God.
I wasn't, right? I don't think that's possible, but I was, but there's got to be a lot going on, right?
Yeah.
Like, and then you're depending on people
Mhm.
to help you that in
That
your
I
disease.
just stole from.
Right? Yeah.
Yes.
So how long does it take for those
Oh.
relationships to start mending?
I walked on eggshells for a while. Like I felt really out of place. My mom still hid her purse for a little while, and honestly, I would ask her to. Not because I was afraid that I was going to take from her, that I was going to get loaded again, but because I was so afraid that she would think that I took from her again, and so I'd be like, Mom, bring your purse upstairs with you, when it was time for bed. But I just felt really out of place. I didn't feel like I belonged there. It was a huge adjustment period for me, to the point where like I was afraid to even go to the kitchen just because I didn't feel normal. It didn't feel normal to me
Yeah.
at that point. And so it took, It took a little while. It took a little while, I think, for those relationships to start to mend. I think it was around like almost 2 years clean that my mom started trusting me with like taking her bank card to like go to the store and get things or like go get gas, or like things like that. And not ask me to bring a receipt back, because that was the other thing was like, yeah, go ahead and go buy for the house, but make sure you bring me back the receipt. Because there's a lot of times in my addiction that the receipt never made it back, and neither did hundreds of dollars from her bank account, and so that was the beginning of it. As far like not that they've expressed to me, maybe they did think it and I just don't know, but I don't know if they ever thought that like me using again was in the cards. I'm sure it was a worry for them, me living back there, but I think more it was just of like, how the hell are we going to do this, right? Like, how are we all going to coexist in this house again? Because they were still really resentful at me, especially my little brother and sister were really, really resentful at me. And if I'm being honest, really, I don't think that my brother and my sister started healing from that pain really until a few years ago when I moved out, when I started living on my own in Merced, which was only 3 years ago, not even 3 years ago, realistically. I think we needed that separation to kind of grow and heal.
Yeah, it takes time.
Yeah. Right? What a big misconception too, right? Like us as addicts, we think that like we come home and we can just think like, okay, we're clean now. We're good. We just worked on ourselves. Like our family should just forgive us. You know what I mean? That's like the mentality going in. But one thing that I've learned is that we just spent all those months, right? Like in a program, whether it's 12-step or rehab, something like that, learning and working on ourselves and dissecting all these things inside of us, but our family didn't have that, right? And so for those of us that choose to like continue in a 12-step program, we have the step work. We have the 12 steps lined up that teaches us all these incredible things about ourselves. Our family didn't have that. And so we're set up perfectly to where we have all these tools and these beautiful things that help us get through life and to heal and to grow from our addiction, but our family doesn't have that.
Right.
And so although I'm healing and I'm working on myself and I'm doing all these things and feel good, my family didn't have a program like that to go to. And so I think it took a little longer for them. And it took a hell of a lot of living amends too. I've made those formal amends to my family, but it takes the day after day living amends that I just don't get loaded anymore, that I show up for them, that I come, like I just dropped my kids off at my parents' house right now and I'm running out the door, right? Not to go get loaded because I'm trying to dump my kids off to go get high, but I'm running out the door to do this recovery podcast,
right?
Type of thing. And so they see that. Right. They see that because apologies just became bullshit in their eyes. They heard me say, I'm sorry a lot of times, but it took some years of growth and truly changed behavior for them to see that in me.
And I get it. Like I can reflect to like, cause where I went to treatment, they have these big completion ceremonies, right? And they make you stand on the podium and talk, right, and give a speech about how it was, like kind of like what we do where we hang out. And I remember my significant other is such a strong woman, right? She showed up and she was not happy with me, right? But she showed up because my kids wanted to go, right? And I can remember my kids looking at me like, and me feeling like I completed this 6-month program, and remember the look of anger in her face, right?
Yeah, like, fuck you.
And I think the more that I was propped up by even the guys in the treatment facility leaving, good job. I think it just pissed her off more and more, right? And I can remember those eyes, right, looking at me. Well, and rightfully so. I did a lot of damage, right? And it took a long time. And even today, like we were at a speaker meeting, this guy talked about transparency, right? About how he's good at admitting when you question him. But as far as transparency, not so much. And it causes a lot of problems in his life, right?
Yes.
And I just so happened to ask my wife on a date with me that night to the speaker meeting, right? And I shouldn't have, because he starts sharing about this and she turns and she looks at me, right?
Those eyes, those same eyes.
Right.
Yeah.
And so some of that stuff still doesn't heal, right?
No, it doesn't.
It's there, right? And from the outside, me and Brandy do have a beautiful relationship. We have beautiful kids, right? But with relationships, there's a lot of stuff that comes with it, right? There's a lot of, and I have to accept where she's at, no matter what, because I'm lucky to have those relationships like you are with your family, right?
Absolutely.
And so it takes time, like
it does.
And so for anybody out there early in recovery, give it time.
Yeah.
You know,
one thing that I learned too, and I say this to my clients too, because like I said, I'm a drug and alcohol counselor, is I always tell them, give your family a fucking break. Like
Right.
they don't want to hear from you. They finally can rest at night knowing that like you're in treatment and you're doing well and you're doing what you need to do. Don't call them. Give them a break. Like let them heal, give them some time. They finally are able to sleep at night for the first time in God knows how many years.
Right.
And just keep doing what you're doing. Just keep doing what you're doing and showing them, make that living amends, showing them that you're not going to go back. Change the behavior.
And it's funny because like being an addict, like loving an addict, right? And it was put to me this way by one of my counselors is like the addict is like the person at the funeral in the casket. They ain't feeling nothing.
They don't know. Yeah.
Right. But all the people around them are affected in so many different ways. Right. Yeah. And a lot of times we don't see how they're affected until we get further down the road. And some of those wounds, like I'm raising a daughter who's been affected by, she was 7 when I got clean. Yeah. Right. And she's seen a lot.
She was old enough to see it.
Right.
Yeah.
She's seen a lot. Right. And so, and she's a great kid. Right. But we deal with a lot of things. Right.
And the repercussions of our actions.
Yeah. It doesn't fade. Right. No. But we have a new toolbox to where we can help them. Right. Yep. But they're going to do, and you'll experience this as your kids get older. They're going to do what they're going to. My sponsor always tells me, you just got to make the popcorn, sit back and watch the show. And for me, at times, that ain't good enough, right? Yeah. I got to try and help this kid navigate life. It's difficult, right? And so now we're living at home, right? And I know for a fact you're leaning on the fellowship hard at this point.
Right? I was at a meeting almost every single day. That once I went to that first meeting with 9 months clean, I was so dedicated to the program, I almost gave birth in that room. I'm sure you remember that. Yeah. I almost literally gave birth in that meeting.
You were secretary in a meeting like probably 2 days before you gave birth.
The day before,
right?
I was in full blown active labor secretarying the meeting and gave birth to my son the next evening. Yeah. Right. I remember sitting in that meeting and I remember everything was just so tight and I was sweating. It was March 30th, right, of 2018. That's my son was born the 31st. And I remember dripping sweat. Like that room's cold. That meeting room is super, super cold, right? Yeah. And I remember sitting in there just dripping sweat. I was so hot, in pain, so uncomfortable. And I remember a member had said, like, go home. Like, I'll finish the meeting. It's fine. Go home. And I'm like, no, I'm good. I went to the hospital at 5 a.m. And this was at, 8 o'clock at night? Yeah, I went to the hospital at 5 a.m. that next day.
And so how does your life transition from being, a young pregnant woman in recovery to now you have a newborn, right? And you're trying to figure this out at 20 years old. And there's got to be so much growth, right?
Yeah.
Like, what does that look like for you?
He went to the meetings with me. Yeah. I'm sure you remember, my oldest son has been raised in the rooms. He learned to hug people and shake people's hands in that meeting, like he's learned and he still to this day will circle up with us, at the end of the meeting. But I brought him with me, because I knew like if I learned my lesson from that first relapse, if I get too caught up in life and the swing of things and neglect the basics of recovery, I'm going to get loaded again. And so, having a baby, I waited till he was a little bit older, but once he was and the weather got a little bit warmer, I went right back into the meetings and he came with me. Right. And I was embraced by the fellows in the meetings. They helped me, they would hold him while I was secretarying the meeting, or they would take over if I had to go feed him or whatever the case was. I was just thoroughly embraced in recovery. And so was my son. He knows the meetings today. He still goes and loves to go. He has hurt himself in that meeting room, God knows how many times, but he learned love in that meeting from the members.
Right. And like I could share a little bit of like our relationship, right? So like you watched my newborn daughter, well your mom did, but you were when you were loaded, right? Yeah. When I was loaded.
Yep.
Right? And
I'm so glad you shared the story.
Right? And it came to a point where like Brandy was like adding up like all the stuff your mom was saying and she was telling me, right? And I recognized it, spot it, got it, right? Yeah. And so I'm like, I don't think it's the safest place that we leave Emma over there anymore, right? And then to like a few years later, right? Like you're clean, you have a young child and you're over my house babysitting my kids. Like you were integrated into our family, right? My family well.
I love
and,
those girls. Love them.
and that's just like, how things come full circle, right? And so
Yeah.
like, what are the relationships like that you have today mean to you, like with your mom, your sister, like,
It's truly indescribable, right? Because we say like addiction's a family disease, right? And
Yeah.
so my family very much lived my addiction with me, and now they're living my recovery with me. I'm the only addict in recovery in my household, in my whole family, realistically, but they support my recovery, right? They've shown up for meetings. They'll probably watch this podcast, honestly, but they're supportive and they love me. They embrace it. They embrace my recovery with me. My family doesn't question if I'm going to get loaded anymore.
Right.
They don't walk on eggshells. Like sometimes they still ask me, like, "Oh, Taylor, are you drinking?" Some like distant family that we don't see that often,
Right.
but Taylor, do you want a glass of wine? No, I'm okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
But it's became normal again. It's became that life is just normal. Life is just okay. Like they see that I've worked on myself enough to know that Taylor's okay today. I have a beautiful, beautiful family with my boys. They absolutely adore my kids. And like I said, like I have 2 kids that have never seen their mother loaded. Like that is amazing.
Right.
That is absolutely incredible. I got pregnant with Carter, my oldest son, when I was 3 months clean. And then Gabriel, my youngest, came, he just turned 2, and it's 2 kids, right, that only know recovery.
Yeah.
They don't know that they won't ever have to know the pains of addiction or what using looks like, and that's a blessing. That is truly a blessing. As far as the relationship with my parents goes, like, as they say it, they say Taylor's in her prime today, right? Like Taylor's in her prime, and it's because they just see the life that I live and they see that what I'm doing, and they get to walk that with me and live it with me. And like, we've never been closer. We can't live in the same home, any of us. We can't live together. But I see my family at least once or twice a week. At least I talk to my sister almost on a daily basis. My brother, is a teenager. He's doing his own thing, but he loves me again. He doesn't feel like he has to be angry when he's around me, because that's a big one, right? That's a really big one for me, is the damage that I caused my little siblings through this.
Well, and that just comes with being part of an Italian family, right? Like
everybody's angry all the time.
Everybody, you yell at each other to express love, right? I get it, because my grandmother was full-blooded Italian. I know what that looks like, right?
Yeah.
It's funny because like I've talked to a lot of parents, right? Because Los Banos is a small town. I'm pretty transparent that I'm a person in recovery. So every now and again, I'll get a call from somebody, right? Like, and it's like anything else. I get a call from somebody that, hey, such and such is dealing with blah, 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 blah. And I can give them the most sound advice, right? I can tell them this is what you need to do. But then parenting my own kids, get out of here, right? Like I'm trying to like delve out tough love and then trying to communicate like it. And I wouldn't say it's more difficult having somebody in recovery or being in a relationship with somebody that's not in recovery. Relationships are just difficult, right? And it's like anything in life, anything worth having isn't going to be easy.
I remember my first sponsor told me at one point throughout my recovery, she said, the longer you stay clean, the crazier you get. And I'd always look at her like, what does that even mean? Like, I don't even get it. Well, the longer I'm staying clean, I'm starting to realize the longer you stay clean, the crazier you get, truly, because we have this program, right? And we have these spiritual principles and we do this work on ourselves. Like, we're still nuts. Yeah. We're still crazy. And so the difference is today is we just know better than to do it. And we do it anyway, which makes it worse. Right. And so that's true. It's the truth.
Yeah. Well,
it's the truth.
Life isn't easy, man.
No.
And it isn't. And so now, like, and I remember like you in early recovery be frustrated because you wanted to get into drug and alcohol counseling, right? And there was no opportunities around here. And so now you're living in Merced and you have a job that you love. Like, what does it mean to you to be able to help give this gift to, other struggling addicts on a daily basis, right?
I absolutely love what I do, and I love my job so much because I get to see the brokenness, right? And then to watch that light bulb go off. I get to see people where they're at and watch them grow through these same type of trials and tribulations that I went through in early recovery, and to provide that hope of like, hey, you know what? Like, you don't ever have to do this again, even if you want to. and then to see that light bulb go off, like what happened for me, to where they see that change and then they actually want this, right? Like you worded it, I think the desire or the desperation turns into a desire, watching people get that and helping people get there, like helping show people that that's possible. To have that is truly, it's indescribable,
Right.
and it is absolutely priceless. I am a drug and alcohol counselor, of course, so I'm employed, but the gifts that I get is truly priceless.
When I think your perspective is so valuable, right? To be able to say, hey, I got clean at 20 years old and I have long-term recovery, right?
Yeah.
And that's like, because people think, like, I tried to get clean the first time when I was like 24,
Yeah.
right? And I didn't stay clean until I was 34,
Yeah.
right? And so I feel like that message needs to be heard by people, because
Yeah.
you don't have to wait until all your teeth fall out of your
No.
head and you lose. You know what I'm saying? You can
Yes,
get clean
yes.
young and stay clean, right?
Yeah.
My sponsor's another one of those who got clean, young,
Mhm.
and then but when people look at him, he's not a young guy anymore, right? He's been clean for 27 years. He's middle aged like myself, right?
Yeah.
I think of myself, right? Like, it might be mental immaturity. Like, I feel like I'm like 24, right? But my body's telling me I'm 40 these days, right? And
Midlife crisis.
right. I guess I haven't got the Harley yet.
Oh,
Maybe
you don't
it's-
have to get the Harley to have a midlife crisis.
Yeah. Okay. Shit. Well, maybe I'm in the middle of it. But and then so how do you, because I know a lot of people that work in recovery, that becomes a recovery. How do you
Oh,
balance
no.
your own
Mm-mm.
with being employed in that field as well?
One thing that I was told way before I even worked in this field, that those that work in this field, right, that work in treatment, you have to work double the program of somebody who doesn't, because we are around the disease, right? For a lot of people, they think that they see the disease and that's enough to keep them away. For an addict like me, that's the exact shit that draws me in.
Right.
Like with all this, the way the drugs are today, right? You hear about, the overdoses and the fentanyl and all this stuff going around. For an addict like me, if I heard somebody's getting some dope that is killing them, they're overdosing, I'm like, oh God, where do I go find that?
Right.
And so I see these people come in, and if I'm not working a program, I'll be attracted to that shit. I'm attracted to the disease, right? Because it's, again, the insanity of the disease of addiction. And so for me, I do a lot of Zoom meetings. I get a lot of Zoom meetings. I listen to this podcast, if push comes to shove, because that'll do it for me. I sponsor women. And so I talk to at least 2 recovering addicts on a daily basis, whether it's my sponsor and a sponsee, whether it's people in my support system, whether it's, just my coworkers at work, they're all in recovery as well. But I still go to meetings. I still work the steps. I still keep in contact with my sponsor. I'm still in service, right? I keep up with the basics.
Right.
Because like I had said, my first relapse was because I stopped doing the basics, right? I let all that stuff go. And again, if I don't do the basics, if I don't maintain that, I'll be right back out there. I'll be one of my clients,
Right.
and I don't want that.
Right. And
I don't want that.
and sometimes our pride and ego keep us clean.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
You don't want to have to go to your
Yep.
coworkers as a client one day.
No, God, no. Oh, no.
So like like me, I hold on to resentment sometimes, and I play in them, and I do, like for you being young, trying to get clean, does it like piss you off when people like tell somebody like, hey, you got to go out there and bleed some more, or
Yeah.
because having that
Yeah.
experience, right? Like I got to imagine that's something. So when somebody young comes into the program, are you automatically like attracted to this person? Like
I will be that first one in the room that goes up to them and say, come here, let me take you under my wing. Let me love you until you can love yourself. Right. Because
Right.
that's like exactly what was done for me. We say women stick with the women, men stick with the men. I'm a firm believer in that. Firm believer in that. So especially like with the women, with the newcomer women that come in that are younger, I just instantly will just run, because I get it. I get the pain and the struggles. I get like the shame and the guilt that comes with it. But, I just try to let them know, like, they're not alone.
Right.
They're not alone, and they can stay clean. I've never drank at a bar legally, ever, and I don't ever intend to, ever, but just all those things that like were told to me when I was in treatment, like, go out, you're not done, go out there, right? No, that's bullshit. Who the hell are they to tell us how we recover or when we should recover at
Right.
that, and so I let people know, of all ages too, even the people that are older. at all ages. Who the hell are they to tell us when we can recover? Who the hell is to say 34 is too old to get clean, right? Or 64, shit, even 74. Who the hell are they to tell us when we can recover?
Well, and it's funny because a gal came into the meeting the other day, and I was secretary, and and I gave her a hug, right, because it was her first time coming back in a while, and I picked up something from our buddy Larry R, right, who and he gave me a hug after we did the podcast, because that's typically what we do. And he whispered in my ear, he's like, is this uncomfortable yet? And I'm like, oh, it's getting there. Because he's holding on to me forever. He's like, we're going to go a little bit longer. We're going to go a little bit longer, right? And so I did that to her, right?
Oh, my God.
But you know what? Like, we need to feel uncomfortable, right? Because a lot of times when we come in, like, people aren't touching us. People aren't, like, giving us hugs. Like, people aren't doing these things, right?
That embrace,
right?
Yes.
And doing this podcast reminds me how important those moments are when we come in, right? That hug. Or that person that just takes that extra second, right? It doesn't take much for me to give somebody an extra 30 seconds, minute, half hour, right?
No, absolutely.
And for me, it's not a big deal, but for that person that's coming in, it's huge, right? Do you have a moment like that you could share with people, like that moment where somebody gave you that hug or I want to hear that.
That first time. So I was saying my son's godfather suggested, right, like go to meetings, get a sponsor, all that. And so I went to the meeting, and I was that addict that came in, right? And again, this is like a really big part of my story. I was the addict that would go into the meetings late. So I didn't see anybody beforehand. I'd go sit at the back of the room, like all to myself, don't see me, don't talk to me. And I would leave early, right? So you don't catch me after the meeting either. Like I would just fly under the radar because I wanted to get high. I didn't want to get high. I wanted to be clean, but I wanted to get high, if that makes sense. I had that. I had the desire to be clean, but I didn't know how to be, right? And so the disease was very much still alive inside of me as far as wanting to use. And so this one time I went to a meeting late, as always, but I walked in on time for the speaker. And so I listened to this woman share, and I was like a deer in headlights, like on high alert, listening to this woman share. And for one, she was sharing my story. But aside from that, the way she was sharing it, I wanted what she had, right? Like she's sharing up there all her trauma and the things that she had and things that happened to her and all these stuff. And to be standing up there in a room of like 300 plus people sharing this stuff with such grace and openness and dignity. And I wanted that, right? And I was attracted to that. And so I went up to her after the meeting and I said, hey, my name's Taylor. I'm new. I don't even think I had 30 days. Or no, I was celebrating my 30 days that night. I said, I have 30 days clean today. And I'm hoping to get a sponsor. And I'm all timid. And at this point, I'm still like this big, right? Like I was still like 105 pounds, soaking wet. I still had some scabs and scars and stuff from the wreckage of my relapse. And I looked like shit. And I knew I looked like shit, the eyes, faces sucked up, black eyes and stuff. And I walked up to her and I'm talking to introduce myself, and she looks at me and she goes, well, aren't you just a little ray of sunshine? And I'm looking at her, and she said, can I hug you? And I told her, yeah. And she just hugged me. And it's like I just melted right there in her arms. And that woman was my very first sponsor, Sandra from Los Angeles. And I just melted in her arms because for the first time, and I don't know how many years, I felt safe. Right. I felt loved. I felt cared for. And I felt like I never had to experience the pain that I felt ever again. And that woman sponsored me for several years through my recovery, until at one point I needed a sponsor that was local, right? Because for that exact reason, though, for that same reason why I chose her and the way that she made me feel, I needed that intimacy with a sponsor locally. But that hug, the power of that one hug, it was a love that I hadn't felt, in years because of my addiction. And that hug changed my life. That hug is why I believe that I stayed in the rooms, And so one thing I want to add too is, like I said, I was the addict that was suffering inside that room, right? I would come late, I would leave early, and I was literally holding on to my seat for dear life. I was literally white knuckling it. in that meeting. I would just hold on to, I'm going to make it through this meeting and not get loaded, right? And I'd literally hold on to the chair, sit on my hands like they tell us to do. And I'm a firm believer that when we take that moment of silence at the end of the meetings, when they say, moment of silence for the addicts who's still suffering inside and outside those rooms, I firmly believe that was you. That was, all of our predecessors praying me back into the rooms. And that's why I believe that I'm clean today, is because of my predecessors praying me back, because I was clean, but I was suffering inside those rooms. And it's because of that prayer, that moment of silence that we take, that I was able to stay and to be here, be here today.
And so before we wrap it up, I usually like to ask, so if somebody's listening to this, right, and they're suffering, what bit of advice would you give somebody that's out there right now?
Just reach out. Reach out. If it's not to family or a friend or something like that, find just one person that you trust and that loves you and that you love enough to say, I need help too. And tell them, just take it from there, right? Just give it up. Turn it over. Turn it over to the God of your understanding, your higher power. Turn it to them and just hit your knees, find that same desperation I did and turn it into the desire, because you can do it. You can stay clean. Just ask for help. That's the hardest part. I promise you, it is the hardest part to say, I have a problem and I need help. The rest is bearable.
Yeah.
The rest is bearable. It's the hardest part, to swallow your pride and to just say, I need the help.
Perfect. Taylor, thank you for doing this.
Thank you, EJ. Thank you, Jesse, too.
Yep, Jesse back there.
Taking your time on a lovely Sunday.
All right.
He's here, too.
You owe me a hug.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. Oh.